There are some people that come up with schemes to steal a few $100s. There are some people that are smart enough to steal tens of thousands of dollars. And then there are these guys. The following people on our list were able to lie, cheat, and steal their way to billions of dollars. These are the top 4 scams of all time. Number 4, the Saviour of Portugal. Alves Dos Reis pulled off arguably the biggest fraudulent scheme in history. Now, we have all heard of the types of schemes that involve someone creating fake bills, coins, or even gambling chips. But Alves Reis had a different idea. His idea was thinking of forging a contract in the name of the Bank of Portugal that would allow him to print off official banknotes from official banknote printers. So that's what he did. He wrote up official contracts, fooled several notaries into signing the contracts, and forged several signatures along the way. He presented the contracts to several printers in London, England, and they began printing the new bills for who they thought was the Bank of Portugal. So how much money was printed in the end? Well, they printed the equivalent of 1% of Portugal's entire GDP in banknotes. After the scheme succeeded, Alves kept 25% of these bills, which made him one of the richest people in Europe. His accomplices split up the remaining 75%. However, after this illegal act, he felt an obligation to try and give back to the country. So he created his own bank and invested heavily in projects within Angola and Portugal. By reinvesting this large sum of money, he single-handedly created a boom in the Portuguese economy, and he was soon viewed as the savior of Portugal. However, after trying to buy the official Bank of Portugal to try and retroactively cover up his scheme, he was arrested under suspicion of fraud. But because his former contracts were so well forged, it made the judge and jury think that the real government of Portugal may have been involved in this scheme. This made his trial take 5 years to conclude. However, at the end of it, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was eventually released in 1945 and died 10 years later of a heart attack. Number 3, the fake country. Gregor MacGregor, yep, that is a real name, was born in Scotland in 1786. For decades, he was a Scottish soldier and adventurer that had seemingly traveled the world more than anyone else in Scotland. He went on several expeditions in 1820 until he returned and announced that he had been named the Prince of Poyais. Poyais was said to have been a newly discovered country that had been located on the Bay of Honduras. He claimed that the area was suitable for colonization, so King George Frederick Augustus granted him 8 million acres of the territory. MacGregor then wrote a book about his newly named country called Poyais and began marketing the country as a land of opportunity. He made many claims like how there was plenty of fish and game, the soil was 3 times more fertile than in Scotland, the natives were pro-British, the capital of St. Joseph had 20,000 inhabitants, and that there was already a bank, theater, cathedral, and even a royal palace. Of course, all of these claims were false, as the land was actually more like an inhospitable jungle and contained no signs of civilization. But MacGregor kept peddling his story. Eventually, about 500 people had given up their life savings in order to move to Poyais. Later, he somehow got the fictional country of Poyais listed on the London Stock Exchange and was able to secure the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars of investment. The first signs of trouble arrived when the first investors and settlers arrived at Poyais. That is when they found nothing. For the first few weeks, they just thought that the government of Poyais hadn't picked them up yet. So they sat on the shores of Poyais for what ended up being months on end. During that time, 10 people died and half had become vitally ill before the remaining settlers were eventually rescued. After this discovery, MacGregor was sent to jail and was put on trial. And after several months of deliberation, he was found to be not guilty of fraud and was released on all charges. After he was released, he continued with this venture, so he secured the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars in loans once again, but was shortly imprisoned afterwards before being released again without any charges. After being released twice from jail with no charges, no one really questioned the legitimacy of Poyais itself. In fact, by 1837, which is 17 years after the scheme started, there were so many competitors that were selling the dream of Poyais that MacGregor decided to step away from the scheme because of all of the competition. So he decided to move to Venezuela in 1838, and within a year he became a general of the Venezuelan army and began making an honest living with a general's salary and pension. He actually became a very well-respected member of the local community and died 7 years later with full military honors. So just to summarize what happened here, this man stole the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars by creating a fake country, selling the idea of the fake country to investors. He was then arrested for this scheme twice and was found innocent twice, then quickly became a general of the Venezuelan army without having any punishment from his previous scheme. This is one of the few men in history that stole hundreds of millions of dollars and got away with it. Number 2, the Madoff Pyramid. Bernie Madoff pulled off one of the largest scams in the history of the world. In 1960, a 22-year-old Bernie Madoff decided to open up his own financial firm. He decided that this firm would be dedicated to trading penny stocks, which are known for being one of the riskiest forms of investing. In fact, investing in penny stocks are pretty close to gambling. However, after some success during the 1960s, Madoff began investing in other stocks and helped create an early computer technology that could accurately retrieve quotes from the stock market. This tech eventually became the NASDAQ, and Madoff became one of the biggest traders on the NASDAQ. After several decades, his firm held $300 million in assets and became a legit investing company. However, in 1992, Madoff decided to change his strategy. He was fed up with his slow growth of his puny $300 million company, so he decided to implement his new investment strategy. What he said was that his new investment strategy would involve investing in blue chip stocks while taking option contracts on them, which would give him a higher return. He promised his investors 20% returns, which was really high. But because of this, new investors came flooding into his fund. Over the next 16 years, Madoff's new fund grew to an astounding $65 billion. However, there were a few fishy things about Madoff's fund. The first of which was that investors could only withdraw 5% of their investment per year. And because Madoff wasn't actually investing the money, his scheme had a maximum lifespan of about 20 years. So what he was doing is he would actually pay his previous investors with money that he received from new investors. This is called a pyramid scheme. And as the new money would come in, he would take a large portion of that for himself. But once the 2008 crash happened, things began to spiral downward for Bernie Madoff. Investors wanted to withdraw all of their money because the 2008 crash left them with financial uncertainty. The trouble was that Bernie couldn't get any new investors, so the money began to dry up and was all gone by December of 2008. This made the Bernie Madoff scandal the biggest case of fraud in the history of the world, where it led to $65 billion in losses for its investors. Madoff was eventually turned into the police by his sons and was sentenced to 150 years in prison. Number 1, the sale of the Roman Empire. In March of 193 AD, Pertinax was the leader and emperor of the Roman Empire. 3 months into his reign, he tried to pass some reforms that would limit the military's power over its citizens. As it turns out, the top unit of the Roman military, which is called the Praetorian Guard, did not like these reforms. So they came up with an idea. Why don't we just take over the empire and sell it off to the highest bidder? That way we can all become rich and powerful. So the Praetorian Guard assassinated the Emperor Pertinax and immediately began to auction off the Roman Empire. A wealthy man named Didius Julianus was the highest bidder and offered 25,000 sesterces to each soldier, which was the winning bid. The sale was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of a few $1 billion today. After the sale, Julianus became emperor. But something that he didn't realize was the rest of the Roman military was on its way to Rome to take back the throne. The military was led by Septimus Severus, and after 3 months, the true Roman army had arrived. Once they arrived, the Praetorian Guard refused to fight for the emperor and sold their allegiance back to Septimus Severus. Once the true Roman army arrived in the city, Severus's soldiers killed Emperor Julianus. It is alleged that Julianus's last words were, "But what evil have I done? Whom have I killed?" Poor guy. The Praetorian Guard ran one of the greatest schemes in history by taking over the throne of the Roman Empire while it was at its peak, and they did this with perfect timing, because the true Roman army was extremely far away, so if they did this, they wouldn't have a response until they all got paid. And then after they got paid, they immediately betrayed the winning bidder. Some of the Praetorian Guard was executed for killing the former emperor, but most of them were pardoned and had no punishment, meaning that this group of men successfully sold the Roman Empire and got away with it. Now, there are a ton of other scams that we couldn't cover in this video, so if you want to see another video like this, please leave a comment and a like down below. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button to see more awesome videos like this, and make sure to check out some of our other videos on this channel, like the craziest homes in the world or the richest people in history. Anyways, I will see you in the next video.